Peyton, nice to see you on this beautiful day again. This time with a quote by Will Durant. A great civilization is not conquered from without until it has destroyed itself from within. The essential cause of Rome's decline lay in her people, her morals, her class struggle, her failing trade, her bureaucratic despotism, her stifling taxes, her consuming wars. From Will Durant. What are your ideas on this? And please share them with us today.
Yeah, this quote is quite interesting to contemplate while sitting within the United States in 2024, obviously. There's a ton of cultural parallel between the United States today and the West more broadly. In fact, Western Europe, much of it is in a similar boat, and the Rome of the third century, while it was in a state of stagnation after reaching an apex of power and dominance and world control and prosperity. And over time, what we saw in the Roman Empire and what we see again today is a decline in what I would consider various virtues. And this is obviously broadly speaking in generalizations, and some of these things are difficult to quantify. But nonetheless, they're real phenomenon. And I would consider some of these core elements industriousness, the ability to understand and make trade-offs, the ability to delay gratification and think long term, the ability to focus on building and productivity and value creation, as well as norms around education, norms around the family, and various institutional strength and levels of corruption. And so the United States, and by extension, a decent amount of Western Europe, has been undergoing this wave. And now we're on the back end of this wave in a lot of ways. And the different factors that go into a civilization's power, prosperity, and stability are multifaceted, and they come in a different order. And there's different amounts of leading and lagging indicators, such that you could already be on the decline. And in fact, civilizations generally go on the decline prior to when the GDP figures hit the books or when the invaders hit the borders. The process starts from within. And there was no civilization in the world that could have conquered the Roman Empire at its peak at 100 AD or 179 AD or during the reign of Hadrian. But by the time that the Visigoths invaded and got past the borders and ended up sacking Rome, they had fallen very far from within, and they'd become much weaker from within. And this is a pattern that we didn't just see in the Roman Empire. We saw this in many, many empires throughout history. And it's sort of a slow fall. That's what we typically see. And that generally comes from the generations after generations of people that live within a context of prosperity. And human nature is such that when you're in prosperity for a long time, things seem more stable, more taken for granted than they in fact are. It seems like something that you as a citizen or as a society are entitled to, and something that's totally static and can never go away. And it's the golden goose that in the end you begin to neglect more and more. That's something you take for granted more and more, and that ultimately will die if it's not fed. And so what does that look like, or what forms can that take? It's quite challenging to know. And it's important to see as well that while these things are going on, they are within a context of new technology today. And so that's the one call out that I would have, is that just because this thing has happened many times before, we see this cultural decline in the United States as it relates to education, industriousness, ability to think long term and sacrifice for the future, corruption, and a ton of other metrics. We're now recasting this same set of what I would call cultural swings, cultural movements, and societal vibes among a different set and a new arena of technology. And so that's the main variable that's really shaking stuff up, where we don't know if the technological game theory that comes from today's world is going to allow things to play out at the same speed, or if the same forces are going to be the most powerful and most important and deterministic in today's environment. But if I was a betting man, I think that it is much more a matter of when than if. And this societal decline is something that's fairly easy to sense for many of us living in these societies today. If we look at the infrastructure, the bridges that we were able to build 60 years ago that we're not even able to maintain today, if we look at a ton of the different aspects of our society and culture, levels of mental health, addictiveness, or addiction, and once again, culture industriousness and corruption. I believe personally that we're very likely to see this slow fall play out before us over the course of the coming decades. And what that means for us, the timing in which it happens, the circumstances that we're left with on the back end, they're quite mysterious and very hard to predict. And some things are still kind of keeping this golden goose laying eggs for the United States in particular, the world reserve currency status, the many institutions that have been built over the years that are surprisingly durable to the pernicious impacts of their corruption from within, particularly thinking of the universities and the federal government and many of those agencies. But nonetheless, we can see these trends from within erode a lot of the strength and the values and the foundation of these cultural institutions and these golden geese that we currently have. And so, yeah, quite a wild ride. I'm quite intrigued to see how these forces play out. What are your thoughts sitting in Switzerland right now, one of the countries that perhaps is immune to many of these erosions from within, but having fled Germany to go there, a country that is definitely not exempt from many of these forces? I'm curious to hear your opinions.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many things that may happen, but the future is definitely opaque. We cannot see through it. We only can look back and try to uh, view the things that are happening through the lens of the patterns of history. Maybe reading history and reading accounts from the older days, like from 1500 on to nowadays, and see how many um, how many believers in nations, in systems, in ideologies, in sects believed that they were the greatest people to come and becoming a new human. But in the end, ego and pride and entitlement took over their course of action, destroyed their sustainable strategy of building things, of maintaining productivity. And so they killed, in the end, they killed their golden egg, their golden goose from within. So the golden goose couldn't lay golden eggs anymore, but got eaten. So the means of production went away. And this is one important thing you talk about. The entitlement we see today, we as people think we can take everything for granted that is right now, the peace, the relative peace, the relative stability, the high levels of wealth we enjoy now, and a working civilization. But in effect, this is not to be taken for granted, and the blanket of civilization is very thin, and if you peel it off, soon savagery appears, and people who think of other people that they are no human anymore because they have another ideology than oneself does. When this happens, I would start to worry, because if you have people who've been formerly friends or family turning against each other just because of their short-circuited brains, like because they think they got another set of belief which is much superior to the other person's set of belief, because we see reality for what it is, and we know the truth, and we know how the things work. When people turn against each other, this is a big red flag. This is a sign of civilizational decline, and this is a sign that we have to ramp up our efforts of coming back together again, of healing ourselves first, of not taking ourselves too seriously, of staying humble and trying to view the world through the eyes of the other person. Because, in effect, every philosophy or ideology we might have is also kind of autobiographically imprinted. Everybody has his or her views because she or he lived a life they lived. And so with some empathy, I believe we can start the process of coming back together. And only when we come back together and start to build things instead of destroying things, like cultural movements try to do, like cultural movements that destroy old statues of persons who do not fit into the morals of society nowadays. But you have to judge the people in their own context, in the context of the lives they lived the years ago they lived. You cannot judge them to today's standards. Otherwise, you have to break completely with the past. But the past can definitely help us to renew ourselves, because there are some systems which evolutionarily survived the time, which still work, institutions and so on, built by so many people and time and hours put in and efforts and thinking, and they still survive today, and we take them for granted. But we definitely are not entitled to these institutions and this wealth we live nowadays without putting in the effort to try to maintain this. So morals, which are different now from the earlier days, and everything starts, stays, and falls with the people working together or working against each other. And what do you think about these thoughts?
Yeah, it's honestly pretty crazy to think about. There's so many interplaying and oftentimes offsetting forces that are at play here in any civilization and its rise or decline or stability or instability, that it's not straightforward to do the math in terms of how they're all going to shake out, how they're all going to net out on what timeline, and really the main variable that changes throughout history. We see that human nature stays quite similar. Humans are, as we call, acquisitive, pugnacious, and greedy individuals, and power thirsty, and constantly going to act out this nature within whatever arena we give them. And the population has changed significantly, and ultimately, the new rules of the game, the rules of the game always are determined by the technology at play. So, for example, we had the effectiveness and primacy of defensive combat, and that was what led to feudalism becoming the predominant power structure within medieval Europe. And then guns come along, offense becomes all of a sudden far more feasible than just chilling in a big stone castle and nobody can touch you. And then feudalism falls. And then soon after that, we have these revolutions come because guerrilla warfare is all of a sudden far more feasible than it was before. We have these collapses of these ancient monarchies that have become metastasized or overstretched in certain places. And then we see the trend of this sort of mimetic power of democracy sort of spread throughout the world. And then eventually we see it become far more and more and more centralized. The great powers of today, the United States in particular, has become extremely overstretched and over-centralized to the point where it has become more corrupt, more burdened by these 20,000 different military bases that we have in every continent in the world, and from within, completely overburdened by this really disastrous balance sheet and a lot of short-term decisions, a lot of easy political moves pandering to people that are large voting blocks, housing market, entitlement spending, blah, blah, blah. And we have this bill that is looming, growing, and eventually probably going to become due at a time when our culture is less and less aligned, less and less united, and more divided against each other, less certain that the people are even excited to unite and support this one big country project. And we see it from all sides. We see on the far left, we see a lot of people who are in the revolutionary mindset of burn it all down, it's unequal, blah, blah, blah. And then on the right, this growing move of the network state and actually wanting to become sovereign individuals and leave this whole system rather than being farmed for a significant portion of their income and having more and more restrictive burdens and regulations on what they can do and their economic mobility. And so both sides are kind of fighting each other from within, and that, of course, tremendously weakens a society. And then there's all these different other forces at play too that are leading and lagging indicators on this bell curve or on this line chart of civilizational power as we think of institutional strength, as we think of corruption, as we think of exports and imports and the strength of the trade network. Obviously, unity and division, centralization versus decentralization, which plays a huge, huge factor in how effectively any organization can navigate efficiently in the world and make good decisions with real world data. And then, of course, network effects, the strongest of which is the world reserve currency status, where the United States can just print money and the rest of the world pays 70% of the inflation bill. The truth and information ecosystem, where can we communicate? Can we get the facts into the light so that we can continuously have an immune system on our decision making? And of course, the debt levels, the demographics, and geography. And of all of these, geography is the one that is not going away for the United States. The demographics seems to be fairly strong, but perhaps becoming a moot point if automation progresses sufficiently in the form of humanoid robots, or even before then in smaller forms of automation that could free up a significant portion of the labor force and ease the importance of demographics on societies. And then, of course, there's the question of what alternatives arise to. And in terms of any shift in world power, there tends to be a transition, there tends to be an old guard and a new guard, and who realistically could be the new guard? We see China kind of hiding a lot of their issues, not giving an honest accounting of what's really going on. Obviously, way more over centralized and with tons of corruption, and realistically, a lot of bubbles probably emerging. Most extreme of which is their demographic collapse, which may prove to be a huge issue, and the other less centralized alternatives of government and society that are emerging throughout the world as we think of cryptocurrency and potential arising of the network state, or this concept of sovereign individuals who no longer are tethered to a society to be kind of owned and milked by a government. And the long story short is all of these factors are playing out before us, and they're not really that hidden or secret, but it's really hard to do the math on what this actually means on what timeline. And so ultimately, in my view, the conclusion to come to is that the future is totally opaque. We are looking into a dense fog of the future, but the one thing that feels quite certain to me is that the future of 20 years in the future is not going to look like today, and it's definitely not going to look like 1997 when I was born. The power dynamics of the world are shifting. The dynamics that rule societies is shifting, and it's almost impossible to run the numbers and see exactly how this will play out. Another factor that I forgot to mention is the obvious decline of American democracy. We have the storming of the Capitol. We have 3 back-to-back elections with the two worst presidential candidates that you could possibly imagine on both sides. And this one, literally, we don't know if the president that is currently in office today, that is running again for 4 more years, we don't know if he's going to be alive in November or even remember his name anymore. It's actually insane who the presidential candidates are. Like, if you want to get just the clearest anecdote to point you to undeniable evidence of the decline of American democracy, just look who is on the ballot in November. It is absolutely absurd. Meanwhile, half the country is worshiping one of the guys who is I'm not even going to get into it. It is insane. It is so insane. And so this whole baseline set of assumptions that a lot of us operate with in the United States at least, and I assume still in Western Europe and in much of this first world, is questionable at best. How stable are any assumptions that the status quo will persist in anything resembling its current form 20 years from today? They're not good bets to make, in my opinion, or at least not with too much confidence. We should have a totally open mind about the possibilities and the fat tails of where things could go decades from now. And it's useful, in my opinion, with that said, to just expect the unexpected, meaning we don't want to try to over predict the future. We don't want to try to over specify and put 10 significant figures on a calculation where all the inputs have 0 significant figures. But we definitely want to prepare for black swans. We definitely want to know that this shit is going to get shaken up immensely and definitely within our lifetimes. It is going to look nothing like it is now. And so, but we don't know in what direction, we don't know what timeline, we don't know what form it will take. And so we should look to make our stance in the world, our position in the world, whether it's financial, whether it's in terms of mobility, whether it's in terms of our skill sets, what we can do, what we know, who we know, all these things, in light of the fact that there is an unbelievable tsunami of volatility that is absolutely awaiting us at some point in our lifetime. And so can we make ourselves as anti-fragile as possible with this clear fact in mind so that when the future shakes out in a way that will absolutely catch us off guard in 17 different ways and at a time that we don't expect, that we can be in as strong of a position as possible to have safety, prosperity, and happiness for ourselves and those we love. So that's kind of the conclusion I'm taking on this. I don't anticipate any insaneness within the next year. After that, I have total opacity in how the future will play out and quite wide open eyeballs in terms of these long-term trends and how all of these dice are about to be cast on this totally new technological and cultural arena that we find ourselves in with 8 billion humans for the first time. So let's buckle up. What are your thoughts on this, man?
Oh man, that's some roundhouse kick. But definitely there's much that we don't know, and definitely it is always worth it to prepare for the worst outcomes possible. That means positioning yourself so that you have some food in your cellar, that you have some social network that will help you in case of emergency, so that you can support each other, like people did in the Big Depression phase in 1920, around that time. They went together and just came together and helped each other out. Made theaters in the neighborhood and so on. So the whole community is of immense value for that. The whole self-sufficiency, knowing how to grow your own food, is of immense value for that, because you can share the knowledge and you can share the seeds and so on. So being prepared is definitely the way to go to look into a future which is ahead of us, but is definitely opaque, which is not transparent at all. And the changes which are coming towards us, looking at the patterns of history, indicate that there definitely will be some power changes with the US, with China, and so on, until there's a new equilibrium of power reached in the world. There will be much which will be shaken up. There will be much which will be shaken up with the movement of the people. Climate change is bringing all the ice from the Antarctica into the sea, which causes the sea level to rise and then causes land masses to shift, and therefore people who lived on the land masses to move as well. So there's definitely tremendous potential of a big movement of humanity across the world, like it ever was. But history plays out in these jumps, but we cannot see so much into the past because not so much of the history of the humanity is written down. And also, I think that the future will very much resemble the past in certain ways. Everybody will be riding a bicycle because this technology existed for a long time. It's definitely useful, and an e-bike is just the next step to to the new future, which resembles the past in its way. And I would also say that to encounter and to prepare yourself for an uncertain future, it is very recommended to look into the past and learn from the virtues of the past. Learn from the old Stoics to not be shaken up by any storm, and stay your ground and stay firm within your emotions and bounce back again, because if you have survived, there is still the possibility to thrive again. You know, not trusting yourself to technology too much, but also trusting yourself to yourself and to the virtues of the past, which can renew our new future, which we and the people who come after us will have to create, and better in a way where we work together, on creating something strong and beautiful again, and hopefully not from the ruins of the past, because too many people want to tear down too much stuff, in my opinion, because they take it for granted that this is just given to them and that their ideology will somehow give them enough food without work and so on. But we need to raise our productivity to dampen that effect of tremendous change which may come. We need to raise our resilience. We need to raise our level of connectedness with each other. And definitely we need to raise our level of kindness with each other and not condemning each other. And there's a signal. If you hate a person which you never saw, this is in my opinion a strong signal that you are being controlled as a puppet by someone else's agenda, and there you have to watch out for. If you're a fan of an autocrat but think business people want to poison the world, then there's definitely a high probability of you being abused to another person's agenda. And also you see the extremes of left and right somehow meet. In the past, you see Nazis and the communists and Stalinists were meeting each other, not at the ideology of fascism against communism, but against, there are people who are worth being killed because they are not worthy of living amongst our society. We want to build in this utopia of future. We want to create totally anew and destroy the past and burn all books. When that happens, we are definitely on the verge of extremism, and we definitely have to watch out for not being dragged into this kind of pool of ideology and hatred. And therefore we have to rethink our political ideals and ideologies as well. Our political agendas necessarily do not have to match with things that are true or with things that we want to create. Like a doctor who wants to help a patient so much that he gives him so much medicine that the patient dies from the medicine. So you definitely don't want to do that. And with politics as well, people saying, he's going to be president or she's going to be president, and the whole system deteriorates because one guy is president or not. In my opinion, it is as well, it proves that the system is more robust than a single person if it can withstand a totally incompetent person, because eventually someone will be in charge of the system who is totally incompetent. And that's also what what Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, I don't know, who said about companies to invest in. You want to invest only in companies which have structures which can withstand a totally imbecile person, because eventually one will take charge. And therefore, looking back to ourselves again, to wrap that up a little, eventually we will make dumb decisions. But you want to structure your life around yourself being able to make dumb decisions from time to time without being totally ruined. That means having relationships with other people who know who you are in the core and know that you are kind, you have a kind heart at your core, and who know and trust you. And you want to trust other people as well and be kind to other people as well, because eventually something will happen maybe that will destabilize yourself and you get emotional or whatsoever. You want to be in a position where you can take off for some month and not have to worry about your income because you need some rest, because some life event came and you are sad or something like that, or you get burnout or whatever. You want to have this built up before. You want to have this kind of emotional resilience built up before storms come and shake up your whole world, so that you can have a firm structure on which you can rebuild yourself, but also maybe the people around you, carry other people with yourself, carry your community, and at the end stabilize civilization as a whole as well. Because civilization in itself is so fragile. We do not want to slip into savagery. Do not want to slip into hating each other. We want to thrive. We do not just want to survive. We want to thrive in communities, building together stuff that is beautiful, robust, and useful, and not decline into chaos and struggle.
100%, man. Yeah, I'll just wrap us up on one potentially optimistic note, and also restate the turkey problem that I think is a useful reminder in this sort of a conversation. And the optimistic note is that we are still experiencing every year millions of the absolute poorest and worst off people in the world come out of absolute poverty. We're still experiencing every year life expectancy in the places that need it most climbing. We are seeing the people that are truly the most destitute, the most suffering in the world, which do not exist in the United States or Western Europe. They exist in Sub-Saharan Africa. They exist in South Asia. They exist in many of the regions that are not included in many of these conversations of civilizational decline that we're talking about. And technology, as well as good incentives and capitalism, are steadily and really meaningfully lifting many of the people out of some of the worst and most preventable forms of suffering that plague literally hundreds of millions still to this day. And so there's a ton of things to be really excited about as we look at our entire species and how things are going for the average Homo sapien, and especially for the people that are most powerless, who need this wave, this rising tide the most. And so wonderful optimism there, largely due to technology and the forces intertwined with technology. And speaking of which, even in these civilizations that are facing a lot of headwinds, a lot of issues from within, we have these incredible waves of synthetic biology and artificial intelligence, and soon after, probably robotics, in my opinion, that are very likely to increase prosperity, especially for the people who need it the most, and importantly, increase upward mobility for the people who start off with nothing, including in the developed world, including in the undeveloped world. And so there's a ton of really good, wise reason for optimism and very well-founded and historical precedent when we look at past technological or general purpose technologies that have swept across our species. There's a lot to be very optimistic about, and it is certain that certain aspects of quality of life will increase, at least for a time, for very, very many people across the world. And that is something to be very excited about, regardless of what country happens to be the most powerful at any given point in time. And obviously, that suite of technology brings opportunity for new forms of disruption in an increasingly fragile world. And so, my cautionary little parable to end it with that I first encountered from Nassim Taleb is the turkey problem. And so, as a little bit of a framing for, okay, Peyton, you're talking about all these different forces that may cause the West to experience a decline or extreme volatility and destabilization all at once. Where's the proof in the pudding? Things still seem to be going up and to the right. And the turkey problem is in reference to the first person point of view of a turkey on a farm in the United States. And so he's born January 1st, and every day throughout the year, the farmer comes out, he gives him good food, the turkey's really happy, things are going really well, it's happening consistently. And so every single day for 250 days in a row, this turkey is like, holy shit, I live in the most stable environment possible. Every single day, my food bowl gets filled up, and I have plenty to eat. And there's also this fence around me that protects me from all predators. And also, if I get sick, then all of a sudden the farmer's pretty concerned about it and makes sure that I have the means to get well again. And the next day when I wake up, there's still this fence around me, there's still this food. This is the most consistent, stable, predictable environment. And just look at the past. I have 250 consecutive data points of stability to give you. When obviously the reality is all of a sudden Thanksgiving comes around and he gets his head cut off all at once, and it happens in a day. And so, bit of a morbid note, it won't actually happen with all of our heads getting cut off, but it is really important to understand that just because we have data points in the past does not mean that the future is stable, or it in fact does not mean that we live in an environment that actually is robust. And most of the time, when an environment is fragile, it actually looks more consistent until it explodes. The forced consistency is actually oftentimes a symptom of fragility. And the environment today, the up and to the right 3% GDP growth per year trend, these can mask a lot of hidden volatility, a lot of hidden risk. And so it's important for us as humans navigating the world that want to manifest good lives for ourselves and want to be able to stay on our toes and do well, regardless of the shaping of the environment, to have open eyes at the forces that are happening behind just the surface level news that came in today or yesterday. There's leading indicators, there's sources of risk and volatility that are real before everything hits the fan. And once again, not doomerism on what form that will be, when it will happen, blah, blah, blah. But we definitely should not be lazy in our thinking and in terms of thinking of and considering the possibilities of what could happen in the future or how we may want to be ready for it. So that's my little cheery note to end us on. Any final thoughts from you, my man?
A very beautiful note of the turkey problem. May we work as if everything will stay prosperous, and may we prepare as if the shit will hit the fan.
Oh yeah, only the paranoid survive, my man.
Oh yeah.
Have a good week. Great talking to you about these things.
Appreciate
Very
you, man.
stimulating concepts.
Yeah, true, man. Thank you very much. See you
Take
next
care.
week, bro.
Yep. See you next time.